let's talk about the media coverage surrounding what is happening on Portland's South Waterfront. Over the past several weeks, the protests outside the Portland Ice Building have been in the national spotlight. But let's remember, people have been protesting there against President Trump's immigration enforcement efforts for more than 100 days. There have been clashes between protesters and federal agents who are there protecting the building. Early on, the demonstrations drew little media attention here on the local level, and especially not nationally. But that started to change in late August, when former Oregon Congresswoman and President Trump's Secretary of Labor, Lori Chavez-DeRemer, mentioned Portland in a cabinet meeting, saying she was hoping for a, quote, crackdown. About a week later, Fox News did a 5-minute segment on the Portland Ice Building protests, calling it a, quote, sanctuary city run amok. From there, the negative rhetoric about Portland has run wild. War zone, like living in hell, everything is on fire. You've heard the sound bites. Much of that rhetoric has been amplified and some would argue backed up by conservative, independent social media journalists and influencers. Last week, I talked with one of them who flew into Portland from D.C.
I'm documenting this. This is the United States of America. I'm an American and I'm here.
Okay, that's Nick Sorter. He has more than 1 million followers on the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. In his bio, he describes himself as being, quote, on scene covering stories mainstream media won't, seen on national outlets such as Tucker Carlson and Fox News. Earlier this month, Sorter was arrested by Portland police for disorderly conduct during one of the protests outside the Ice Building. The Multnomah County District Attorney's Office ultimately did not move forward to formally charge him. But his arrest brought the political spotlight back to Portland, and in a big way, with the U.S. Department of Justice promising to investigate Portland police over Sorter's arrest. Sorter is also one of several social media personalities who have been given special access to the Ice Building in South Portland, as well as access to federal officials. Another person enjoying that access is named Katie Daviscourt. She writes for the Post-Millennial. It's a Canada-based publication that calls itself one of the largest conservative news outlets in the world. Here she is on the roof of the Portland Ice Building. And Fox News also has a correspondent that is allowed on top of and inside the Portland Ice Building. Now, KGW has asked for that same access numerous times, and our requests continue to go unanswered. Same goes for other local media outlets. Just days after I talked with Nick Sorter outside the Ice Building, he and others who are prominent on conservative social media pages were invited to Washington, D.C. for a roundtable with President Trump, Secretary Kristi Noem, and Attorney General Pam Bondi. They were asked to talk about Antifa and what they experienced on the ground in Portland. Here are pictures they posted from that day. Let's listen to some of what they had to say.
We're the ones that were on the ground. We're the ones that are actually reporting what's going on. And you know, much of the legacy media has been either ignoring it or covering for Antifa for years now. So thank you guys so much for taking this seriously. And President Trump, you mentioned that flag. So remember, you put out a truth right after
that's right. I saw that.
Took this flag from that man that was burning it in the street.
I saw it. Do you know who he is?
Oh yeah, I know exactly who it is.
So why don't you give it to Pam? Give it to the Attorney General, and let's start prosecutions. And at least that horrible night made you famous. Right? You got
He was already
I got a text from the President of the United States, so I appreciate that.
And President Trump, after that happened to Nick, I called Harmeet Dillon, and we opened a pattern and practice investigation into the Portland police very publicly as to how they let this happen.
I'm an investigative journalist from Seattle. I work for the Post-Millennial alongside Andy Ngo and Jack Posobiec. I have been infiltrating Antifa cells in Seattle and Portland for the past decade. I know their inner workings, but today I want to focus on what is happening in Portland at the ICE facility. I've been covering this for the past 4 months, and this is a call out to corporate media who has completely ignored this story or has falsely reported on it. This is nothing short other than a sustained attack on the United States, which is being supported by Democratic elected officials. The Portland Police Bureau has completely abandoned several blocks outside the ICE facility, giving away their jurisdiction to a terrorist group who has spent the past 4 months harassing, assaulting, and intimidating anyone they perceive to be against their cause. Today, I am sitting here with a black eye and a concussion after being violently hit in the face with a metal pole while reporting outside the ICE facility just this past week.
Portland Police has had a presence outside the ICE building since early June when the protests began, and they've arrested 50 people in connection to those protests. Last week, Senator Ron Wyden posted this on social media, responding to Katie Davis Court's picture on the roof of the Portland ICE building. Senator Wyden wrote, "Assuming actual local news outlets like OPB, The Oregonian, Willamette Week, Oregon Capitol Chronicle, the Portland Mercury, K2, KOIN, KGW, KPTV, and others would get the same rooftop reporting access as these right-wing influencers." Davis Court responded to that post saying, 1, I am not an influencer. 2, I'm a full-time employed journalist who has been covering the occupation for the past 4 months, mostly by myself with the exception of another independent journalist. If local news had any ground presence over the last 4 months, they would have also been invited to embed with ICE or FPS. Where have they been? Okay, worth noting that to our knowledge, the national arm of Fox News has not had a ground presence there for the past 4 months, yet they were allowed in with the feds. But okay, that brings us back to the original question, the difference between journalists and social media influencers. Those of us who work on this show see the main difference coming down to rules and oversight. We have to follow many rules and ethics and are held accountable for what we put on the air, not only by our station and ownership group, but also by federal agencies like the FCC. While self-described independent journalists can post their take on a situation with little to no oversight or rules. So that's how we see it. This morning, I talked with conservative radio talk show host Lars Larson to get his take.
Well, part of the problem of describing, say, somebody who's acting as an online or web journalist, and I do both that and regular broadcast. If you describe them as an influencer, I think it's not only inaccurate, but it's pejorative. If you describe somebody who's acting as a journalist, somebody there to cover the story, as an influencer, influencer says something different. It says you are a gun for hire, and if somebody is paying you money, then you go out and you promote either a particular idea or a particular service or a particular product. That's not what journalists do.
Now, I also asked him what he makes of the Trump administration picking and choosing who is allowed access to the Portland ICE building and federal officials.
I think it's exactly par for the course because Trump has been under attack from the mainstream media for 10 years. So the fact that he plays favorites doesn't surprise me one little bit, any more than I've, throughout my entire career, run into companies and individuals who've said, we don't trust the media and we're not letting you in.
Okay, well, joining us now live is Al Tompkins, an award-winning journalist who's worked in the news business for decades. He wrote for Poynter Institute and authored a textbook about multimedia storytelling. He also helped write the National Code of Ethics for both the National Press Photographers Association and the Radio and Television Digital News Association. He's known for teaching journalists all across the world. Mr. Tompkins, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Blair. I would say, could I just speak to a couple of things I've just heard, just to sort of...
Sure, go for it.
The FCC really, the Federal Communications Commission, really doesn't enforce ethics. They enforce the law. There was a time when we had something called the equal time rule and the fairness doctrine, where we'd have to give equal time to everybody. But anybody that ever listened to talk radio remembers when that went away, which allows over-the-air content like, radio stations to say whatever they want to say. Basically, they have to serve the public interest. But the FCC doesn't enforce ethics. That's first. The second idea is that for someone to be an influencer is a gun for hire, I think is a bit of an overstatement. An influencer can be a propagandist, they can be an opinion writer, they can be all sorts of things, but none of that is necessarily a gun for hire. It could be somebody who just passionately feels about something. So it doesn't make them bad people. It's just that we as consumers have to be better consumers and ask questions. Does this seem like it's an even-handed treatment of this?
So what, from your perspective, is the difference between, say, a social media influencer reporting on these protests and a journalist who works for a media outlet.
It's a good question that people ask a lot, and that is, what is a journalist? And to me, it's a fairly straightforward answer. A journalist to me is someone who collects and disseminates information with equal veracity, with equal force, equal enthusiasm, no matter what it finds. So I would ask these people who, met with the president the other day, have they ever said anything critical of Donald Trump? Do they ever report anything critical of him? And the answer is no. No, they don't. And so for me, those people aren't journalists. Those people are propagandists. And I don't use that word in a mean way. I mean, propagandists can be fact tellers, they're just one sided. So I think commercials are mostly propaganda. It doesn't make them bad. It just makes them one-sided. So if it's a person who is willing to tell the truth, no matter what they find, no matter what we personally might think of it, then that person might be a journalist. However, we as journalists, Blair, you and me both, we get criticized for not being open to the truth, to only giving one side or another. And I think we have to plead some guilty to that we haven't always been as aware of passionate feelings on one side or another as we might have been. But I reject the idea that we are opinion writers, that even what you've done today, just in this segment, has tried to give voice. I'll say one other thing. One way that people think about the truth, Blair, is in visuals. And even in this segment, you showed video, for example, of protesters and police and a standoff and military and all that stuff. And you showed that, and I think I'm right, and I could be wrong, and correct me if I am. I don't remember seeing a date stamp on that video. I don't remember seeing the words like file video or last Thursday or a week from Friday. Even the graphic that you have, the big story graphic that you had behind you, has a picture of a standoff. And to me, those images send a repeated signal that this is going on every day. This is what our town looks like. And it's not. By your own visuals, you showed that it's a fairly small gathering outside the ICE facility. So it's the repeated use of those images without constantly reminding us that this isn't today. This was real. It was one day, but it's not now. And we have to take some responsibility for that. We are transmitting that image as though it's recurring, as though it's happening right now.
I do believe we had the date in the top right corner, but we could have said that verbally.
Then I plead
agree
guilty.
with you. So we talked about, rules and ethics that journalists have to abide by that independent content creators aren't necessarily bound to. Can you help explain how you teach ethics to current journalists and aspiring students?
Sure. Well, first of all, the ethics tell us what we should do, and the law tells us what we can do. And sometimes they're not the same thing. So basically, the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics contains 4 tenets. The first is to be fair, to be accurate. So seek truth and tell it as fully as possible is the first tenet. Number 2 is act independently, independent of your own biases, independent of what would be good for you, independent of your advertisers or of your own political leanings. Act independently. It's not about you. It's about the journalism, about the story. Third is be accountable and be accessible. Not something that we as journalists are known for doing really well. Can someone get a hold of us and hold us accountable and be accessible? And I think that the idea is maybe we should be more accessible to people, to be able to call us into question, to have corrections that are as prominent as our mistakes, for example. How do we go about correcting? Newspapers, for example, sometimes have corrections at the end of a story or something like that. Online, you do. We have corrections, but sometimes those corrections aren't nearly as prominent as the mistake, and that's an ethics issue. We tell people all the time in the classes that I teach look, report the news without fear or favor. right? Without fear or favor. I can't fear what you're going to do or what you're not going to do. You're not going to give me access. You're going to be mean. You're going to, bar me from a news conference or whatever. I can't worry about that. I've got to tell the story as I find it, and it's going to be what it's going to be. And I can't fear that the people who normally like me aren't going to like me because I say something, favorable about some candidate or some governor or mayor or president that you don't like. Sorry, that's the way it goes. They did something really useful and worthwhile, and they should get the credit for it. And that's the way it goes. You don't like it, then tough. It might be your day someday, but it's not today. So to me, it's all about fairness. We sometimes say our job is not to be biased, but that's not possible. I'm biased, and so are you, by virtue of who I am and where I grew up, how old I am, and what my education is, and all of those things, your religious beliefs, your gender, all of those things influence. So we can't pretend to be unbiased, but we can strive to be fair.
Okay, Mr. Tompkins, thank you so much for your time tonight and your insight.
I think it's a useful conversation that you're having here. I hope you keep doing it.
Thank you so much.